Shane Kilkelly.
And I'm Kyle Thompson.
And you're listening to General Intellect Unit. And this time we are talking about Act 3 of Kentucky Route Zero. If you didn't get the first couple of episodes, yada yada, go back. All that sort of stuff. Wow, what an act. This one's big. This is a substantial increase in scope over the first two main acts. Because this clocks in at what? 2 hours, maybe 3 sometimes, if you're really going for it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
It's a lot. So, in terms of generalities, like, I like this act a lot. It's got some of the best scenes in the entire thing. I was reminded of a problem I've always had with this act, that I think the connective tissue between scenes is really quite strange and tenuous, in that when I think about Act 1, I can very clearly remember the chain of cause that leads Conway from Equus Oils to the Marquez farmhouse to Elkhorn Mine and so on. I can kind of never remember how they get to the Hall of the Mountain King in Act 3. It's Teflon. It slides off my fucking brain. Do you find that's the case, Kyle?
So I would say that this act, it's somewhat better held together than Act 2, where you get that weird stuff about the permit from the Bureau, which is what is that even about? We never get any explanation. It's just magical realism nonsense. But this one, it's there are kind of coincidences that knit everything together, right? It's kind of okay, well, you start out, you're driving to try to go back to the Zero, and then your car breaks down, you run into the pair, they hook you into going to the bar in exchange for mechanical repairs, and then after that, it's okay, well, we better go somewhere, and they have a reason to go down to the Zero now because they want to collect on that debt from the bar. So there's kind of all, there are reasons given for every place that you go to, unlike Act 2, but I agree that they're quite coincidental. It doesn't have that they're not they're not Weaver showing up in Act 1 where it's very heavily produced, and you get a lot of action on screen to justify the plot going to the next part. It's more just a bit of dialogue between characters in a scene, and that's the motivation that's there.
Mm-hmm. Oh well, it's I don't think it's massively worse off for that. It's just interesting to reflect on that sort of seemingly very tenuous kind of connections that drive the plot forward at this point. But I could also imagine, given the scale of it, there's so much material they have to cram in. It's there could well be material that was cut because it's just we just don't have time to put more stuff in to make it connect better, perhaps. Before we move on to the actual content, I was flicking through the options menu, the pause menu, and I was it has the usual shit. It has exit, it has load and save and all this kind of stuff, and options. But then I was hold on a moment, multiplayer? There's no multiplayer in this fucking game. So I clicked through, and the multiplayer instructions it gives you are really astounding. So I'm just going to read them out here. Multiplayer instructions. Point 1. Play until you encounter something. An image, a sound, a choice of words, a notable absence that reminds you of someone else in the room. Point 2. Pass control of the game to that person. Point 3. You don't have to explain yourself. Point 4. And so on. I'm going to have to try this sometime. It's really good.
No, I like it a lot because it reminds me of the way that perspective and dialogue focus is shifted in the game. Between, the various characters, sometimes even to just random NPCs. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like it as a tabletop game designer. It reminds me a lot of something you might do in that kind of parlor gamey sort of design approach.
Yeah, it has the sort of it has the sense of tabletop RPG instructions that are printed on the back of a pack of cards or something. You know, it's like this like very straightforward, like 4 bullet points. These are the entire rules or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. As far as generalities go for this act, I think I definitely approached it with a certain amount of trepidation because, like, we're well on the downhill slope here in Act 3. And you know, just that stuff about, like, the side effects of the medical treatment or Conway's dialogue at the beginning, it just, like, totally knocked me out. I was like, I can't even play this week. So we had to postpone recording a week because it was just too much with what I had going on in my life situation at the time. And then when I did play through it, like, I managed to play through it eventually, of course. And just came away from it with a really just rough sense of, like, depression, because this is an act that is pretty much all about Conway's regrets in life, and how they weigh him down to a point where he is ready to give up on living.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it might sound strange to say, but there's a marked increase in just sadness in the tone right off the bat, which is saying something because it's quite a grim game up until this point, and they kind of managed to dial it up somehow. Yeah, wow, it's an absolute beast.
It's heavy.
It's very
heavy.
Yeah. So the cold open gives us this introduction to the heaviness, but, like, it has this, like, huge shift in color palette initially. Because we open on this golden sunlight and Lisette and Conway sitting at the kitchen table in the morning sun, apparently. There's something immediately off about this because Conway is swaying in his chair, which is quite weird. The conversation kind of flits around between, you know, like, oh, the horses were keeping me awake. Oh, Ira loved those horses. And then kind of slips into the stuff about Charlie, Lisette and Ira's son, and the accident where Charlie slipped off of a roof on a day where he was replacing Conway. And real tragic little kind of story there. There's some really nice kind of, I mean, yeah, this is the increase in sadness right from the start, right? Like, you have dialogue options such as it's getting harder, and you know, when Lisette seems to stumble finding the words to describe Charlie's accident, your options are it's either a shame, a tragedy, or a I forget what the other one is, but it's quite sad as well. So this is bad shit, you know. But it's a really gorgeous little scene.
Yeah, and this relationship between Conway, Lisette, Ira, and Charlie is going to constantly be in the background throughout this act. We open with this scene because so much of what Conway reflects on and so much of the sort of, like, mood-setting background stuff is directly tied into this relationship, or these relationships that Conway had prior to starting this job. We really focus in on this stuff in this chapter.
And there's also the very particular detail that, like, Conway seems to be very, very haunted by the fact that, in particular, it was his drunkenness that got Charlie killed. That it was because he was too drunk to work that morning that Charlie had to go. And Charlie being maybe 19 or 20 or something, he's a young college student at that point. But he was maybe on vacation from his studies back home, and, like, Dad was like, yeah, get in the van, we have to go and do a roofing job. This scene sets up the last delivery as well, where Conway's going to go out and take out this last delivery to Dogwood Drive. And this, before Lisette is... there's a couple of options here, but I think maybe the canonical one is that she's packing up to move in with her sister Cora because her memory is slipping, and it's kind of the end of the road for Lisette's antiques. But we get a really beautiful transition then, where The light dims just a little bit, and Conway turns slightly away from the table, and the camera switches to an above head view, and we see that he's actually in Truman's house. He's still sitting at the kitchen table, and now he's got a glowing orange skeleton leg that he's taken notice of for the first time. Which, yeah, this thing is... Yeah, like, especially because, like, if you're playing this back to back, the last thing we saw was the boys from the distillery, glowing orange skeletons, and now Conway has this going on. Yikes.
Yes, from the play in the lower depths that we just saw in the interstitial part. Yeah, so this leg, I mean, it really introduces us to the effects that they're using for the skeleton people in this game. They put a ton of work, you can tell, into these effects. It has something that resembles like phosphor decay. So if you, for example, are using a CRT monitor and you have a really bright object that is moving against a really dark background, you can actually see the rate at which the phosphors on the screen are decaying because the contrast is so high, and it creates this blur behind objects. And that's basically the kind of look that they're emulating with this effect. And it's essentially like a kind of after image trail that goes after the leg, but like when the object is not moving very much, it appears as a blur, because it's essentially like a number of images accumulating on top of each other. If, you know, say Conway's leg is just fidgeting from one side to the other, it looks just blurry. It looks so good. It's such a wonderful little effect, and it's so warm as well compared to a lot of the colors that are on screen. This is really beautiful to look at, and it's very subtle as well. Like I could definitely imagine, as you said, like them putting a lot of time into writing these textures and shaders. Yeah, this is very fancy for something that's not on screen very much. Really, like it takes up very little of the screen when it's there, but like it's very hard not to notice it. Yeah, very different. It's very different. Like very, it contrasts very sharply with the flat shaded polygons that make up the rest of the game. Yeah. There's no shaders anywhere else. It's all on those legs. So, like, now that he's come around, Truman and Shannon are asking him, like, how does the leg feel? And the three options here are absolutely heartbreaking. Option one being, this isn't my leg. Option two being, okay, yeah, but it wasn't, maybe it's not actually worth it. And option three, I'll quote, it was the heat. The shingles were cracked in the sun, and one of them slipped out from under his feet. And he's just spacing out and like not actually hearing them, and he's still stuck in conversation with Lisette. To which Truman and Shannon are like, uh-oh. This brings us to like the side effects of the medication, a sense of like deja vu and lost time. Like Truman asks him like how did it feel to be under, and he says like I was dreaming, and he's like that shouldn't be a side effect of this. Like you shouldn't have dreamt during that moment. But this sense of lost time and kind of scrambled memory is a side effect of the neuropinol TM. And so this will stick to Conway from this point out. He'll get more scrambled as we go. Yeah, this description of the side effects with what I was going through between COVID, not having a regular sleep schedule, and working in multiple time zones, this is what completely knocked me out. I was like, I can't play this game right now. This is too intense. Like, this is too close to what I'm experiencing in my life right now. So it's really rough. And yeah, I mean, I think that third response is really setting up this connection between regret and debt.
Yes.
Which we see recurring throughout this episode.
Absolutely. There's the mention of the billing again and the Consolidated Power Company. That, like, I mean, Truman doesn't even really understand the repayment plan. He's like, oh, it's something about, it'll all be folded into your electricity bill. And there's something here about generating electricity to send back to the grid. And so, like, yeah, he's been hooked up for an absolute fucking monster of a debt that Truman doesn't even seem to really understand what he's damned into. Yeah,
and this description of how the energy credit payment plan works, like where you like basically feed energy back into the grid, kind of reminded me of like the description of surplus value.
Mm-hmm,
like
sure.
it's like, oh, it's something that doesn't really make very much sense. We don't really know how it works. And also it's like, everything you do in your life, you are feeding energy back into this grid of capitalism. Yeah, so it's that was the thing that came to mind when I read that. It was like, oh yeah, this sounds like surplus value. This sounds like exploitation.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it definitely has that same that sense that Marx gives of like this vampiric alien kind of presence, this like bizarre alien logic that you're all kind of enslaved to, and there's a lot of that kind of grim and gothic imagery going on here around the Consolidated Power Company that is very, very similar to what's in the pages of Capital, except we don't have vampires this time. It's skeleton monsters, but can't have everything, I suppose.
Yeah, electric skeleton boogaloo.
Mm-hmm. So at this point, Julian will fly you back to the Museum of Dwellings, and then you get the first proper title card is for the Museum of Dwellings. The truck is still parked outside. The parking lot is flooded, which gives us really nice, and like it's viewed from above, so it's got this lovely reflective kind of thing going on. The museum is closed, and Emily, Ben, and Bob are standing outside it. And predictably, when Conway tries to interact, they just don't respond. It's as if he's a ghost.
Yeah, one of them can kind of hear him, but like it's only like, oh, did you just hear something? Like, and then everyone's like, nah, it couldn't be anything. Like, it's like there's a spectral presence speaking to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, like, what must it be like for Conway to be just gaslit by these fucking clowns every time they encounter him? It's just like, what the hell's wrong with these people? It starts to feel more and more like Emily, Ben, and Bob are actually on a different plane of reality somehow. Not just that they're... I mean, yeah, who the fuck knows what these people really are at this point. But there's a bit of chat here then with Shannon about like the side effects, and like, I mean, Shannon's still concerned for him. Like, he's like, you shouldn't be driving. You're gonna have to take it easy, and are you feeling okay with the medication? And this is where we get into some really interesting dialogue. This is where the stuff about Weaver's ADHD meds comes up. But we covered that a couple of episodes ago. But there's also things here about Shannon's family history with precarious access to healthcare.
Yeah, that's right. Because of her family's immigration status, she said that essentially, like, there would be periods where it was like, oh yeah, you're like legal enough to get healthcare, and then there would be periods where that would get banned, and they would have to like go through like black market networks among the miners, or try to talk to Shannon's family, because when they were working for the university still, they had like a decent medical plan through that. So they would, kick them some meds here and there. But it was all kind of precarious, and, obviously they didn't have a proper consultation with a doctor. And this is what led to Weaver giving Shannon her ADHD meds. And, as someone who's been denied medical treatment for ADHD for the last few months because terrible doctors, this definitely hit close to home.
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, I don't know, like the whole thing about like there being like a kind of family or like a kind of local network folklore of medicine, because like somebody's got a half bottle of antibiotics and they can kind of like half advise you on like, the right time to take them in the right kind of dosage. But everything's just a fucking dice roll, basically. And it's how Shannon ends up like delirious and dying of dehydration from the ADHD meds. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, nobody fucking diagnosed her properly, or who knows how many she took,
Yeah, exactly. Like she, Shannon clearly does not have ADHD, and was just taking. It was a kind of a coincidental thing where it was like Weaver was got diagnosed with ADHD as a kid, and like one of the symptoms that was suggesting she might have it is that she had trouble focusing in school, right? But then Shannon was having a trouble focusing in school because her parents' precarious immigration status and like the nature of their work, which was not actually because of ADHD, but because they couldn't actually get a doctor. Weaver was basically well, I had trouble in school and I started taking these and I did better, so maybe you should take these too. And it was like, well, yeah, okay, seems reasonable enough. And for a while it helped, until she just, went into hyper-focused nightmare zone because of, being hopped up on meds she didn't need.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. It's a very affecting little digression. And this becomes more of a thing in these next couple of acts where Shannon will just kind of blurt out something about her family history or some very interesting anecdote. And so that's how they're delivering some of the backstory here. They start to do that a bit more. It's an interesting character move, right? Because it seems like Shannon can't help, when she observes something, she just can't help form the association and start talking about it.
I think this is also because this is where we start to really majorly transition to Shannon becoming the main character or the protagonist of the game, as opposed to Conway. So they, Conway manages to have his blackouts. He talks to his dog, but they start to transition these things over to Shannon because she's going to become the central character, progressively over this act and then into the next couple.
Yeah, definitely. So their plan for now is, well, where do we go next? It's kind of either or both of get back on the Zero somehow or find Lula, but they're not totally sure where to go next. Which is maybe setting up this kind of loose connective tissue of it's not quite as strong a pull that's pulling you forward now. But when you set off driving, the car will break down. I don't think you can reach any landmarks on the map without breaking down at this point.
Yeah, no, it's just it doesn't really matter where you choose to go because it's actually just a setup for this breakdown scene.
Yeah, this is a mandatory breakdown. The title card is a tree, and you are stuck in front of a tree. It's a downed tree. This is where they do that physical modeling stuff, where the tree is dangling off of power lines and it's kind of bouncing a little bit in the wind. So the kind of stuff they were playing with in limits and demonstrations is definitely here. There's a fun little bit where Shannon tries to call for a tow truck, but you get Shannon's side of the conversation, but the other person's side are all parenthesized items such as inaudible, obtuse, and inaudible, accusatory, which just makes for a really fun little kind of routine as we work through that conversation. But it's not clear at all that anyone's coming to help them, so they're just kind of stuck at the side of the road.
Yeah, because first of all, it's this is because we are an audience to a stage play, right? So we can't hear what the other side is saying on the phone. We can just hear what Shannon is saying, and then what a bystander would hear from the phone. So that's a cool touch. And then it's at some point, basically, the conversation just terminates with background noise. So it's like,
yeah, the final option is like distant traffic noises or something.
yeah, it's like, who knows if someone's coming?
Yeah, they just don't get anything out of them. Conway can wander over and chat to Ezra. There's a fun little bit with like Ezra doing like 20 questions on him, and it's the guess is that it's a bird's nest, which Ezra describes as being that like it fell out of a tree, but we're putting it back together, which gives you maybe tiny insight into Ezra's thought process. But at some point we abruptly switch cameras to a motorcycle barreling down the road, and its radio is going at full blast. These are two new characters. This is Junebug and Johnny on their way to a gig. These are itinerant musicians, and they are fucking great characters. I love these two.
yeah.
They're fucking amazing. They're such good like comic relief to be brought in at this point, and there's new blood being injected into the cast. Really fantastic.
Yeah, very surreal. These are basically hipster robots, and they're very into their music.
Mm-hmm. They're the worst. They are me in my 20s, the most obnoxious music fan, you know. But they're great because like the motorcycle, the camera's kind of pivoting around this nice little motorcycle, but their chatter back and forth is basically like they're trying to get to this gig. Oh well, you know, we wouldn't be late if we didn't stop to record that frog. There's just really lively banter between the two of them. They're evidently very good friends, and in kind of they're establishing quite a contrast between these two and Conway and Shannon right up front.
Yeah, well, it's very funny. Like, you have two options for why they're late, and like, you know, in the entertainment, they were just waiting and waiting and waiting for these people to show up, right? But then when you get to decide like what the reason was, it's just like some ridiculous thing that never gets explained or discussed. Again, it's just like, oh, they were just doing hipster shit.
Yeah, like Johnny needed to record that drain pipe or something. He just had to get it on tape, you know, found sounds and this kind of stuff.
Yeah, Johnny is Puya here making his his noise music, you know, recording various noises. Yeah,
absolutely. But the camera flips again to the motorcycle driving past the tree, and then flips back to the motorcycle. There's a very knowing what comes next to these initial points of contact are actually very interesting, because Johnny insists on turning back to help, and one of the options is to say that they had a kid with them. And then when they do turn back to help and they pull up, Johnny and Junebug address Ezra first, and seem to establish a very immediate rapport with the kid. So it was just very interesting on this replay to note that was happening.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that that's a constant throughout this episode, that Junebug has a lot of rapport with Ezra. I think that, you know, they're much closer in age than Conway and Ezra. Yeah. I think that's really important. And Johnny to some degree too, but, you know, he's mostly off screen, so.
Yeah, Johnny's often not on screen with us. He's a bit of a background character, but he's a subtle one. He's a much more subtle character than Junebug is. But now that they're off the bike, the first thing you'll notice about them is this whirring mechanical sound when they walk, which they don't say they're robots now, but it's like it's in some sense it's kind of hard to miss. But then I do know people have missed this, and they've been like puzzled all the way to the end as to what the fuck is that sound? Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at Junebug's model on scenes where there's more of a close up, and you could and she's in the walk slow animation. It's very clear that she's a robot. She has this very like kind of like moving from her core as opposed to moving from like with her arms. It's a very kind of like, I am a robot, hello human sort of walk that she does.
It's a very interesting walk. I think it's a it's sort of, yeah, it's a lot of that. It's also a lot of I don't know how to describe it. She walks very high, like she's on high heels, and is like, again, as you said, walking with her core.
Yes,
but it gives this almost like the Jetsons family robot kind of vibe, you know, in a certain kind of way.
Yeah. Although that robot didn't have legs.
But
yeah.
What do I think? Maybe it's the dress that makes that seem that way. You know,
I think it's kind of like of that era, though, is what I get. Like, you know, that era of robot depictions is kind of what I get out of it. Is this kind of like stilted, high up, maybe a little bit 3PO, you know?
Yeah, something like that. She walks with her palms facing the floor as well, in a very like high femme sort of like high heels kind of kind of gesture.
Yes, yeah. She looks kind of like she's doing a
catwalk strut or something.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. That pins it down. This but like, I mean, great fucking animation, right?
Yes, and if she's running though, like if you're in an area where you move quickly because the game decides what pace you walk at any given area, she just runs full gait. It's not a stilted thing there.
That'd be way too much if it was just like, you know, just watching her fucking like climb up the hill or whatever.
Yeah.
But the conversation here is great, where they're introducing themselves, and they're kind of offering to fix the truck in exchange for the gang coming to their gig to fill out the audience a little bit. They can fix the truck because they're robots, but they're also self-confessed gearheads, and they're what name did you give to their motorbike? I want to know this.
I put the what was it now? The deviant vector or something like that. The first weird vector. Yeah, the first option, weird vector.
Mm-hmm. I think this is something like Blue. There's only one real option here, and it's weird vector. You know.
Yeah.
Also, I guess because like one of the tracks on the soundtrack is called Weird Vector, so I kind of take that to be canonical.
Oh yeah. No, it's a good name.
It's quite nice. But anyway, the truck is fixed and they're back on the road. You get this overworld of Kentucky bit, which could be one of the last times you get to explore Kentucky above ground. So you need to mop up some of these things, such as going to Equus Oils or whichever location you chose to see Carrington. For me, it was Equus Oils. I was a tiny bit disappointed that there isn't that much here, because Carrington is waiting on the crew to arrive, because they don't start setting up for the show until morning. I was like, it'd be nice to see the play. But there's some fun little bit of dialogue here. There's stuff about, like, you know, he's asking like, where should we set up and this kind of thing, you know, and you can kind of suggest that the audience and the players should be mixed together, and he's like, yes, how very postmodern, and this kind of stuff, you know. But it's more Carrington, you know.
Yeah, it's very easy to miss this. Very, very, very easy to miss this. So I guess for myself, because I chose to have him go to the storage unit, I would have to go there when you end up on the Zero towards the end of this act, in order to act, like, probably between being in the Hall of the Mountain King and then going to the Bureau. That's probably where you can go meet Carrington if you make that choice. Yeah. But I missed this, yeah.
This act is the last time you get a chance to do those open world exploration sections, actually, in both cases, both for the Zero and above ground. If you talk to Joseph, Ezra immediately asks, does your computer have games? And Joseph says, yes, it does, actually. My niece came by and installed games on there. So it is no longer the case that games is not real. This is fucking heartbreaking, though, because, like, one of the games there is the therapist game, Psychoanalyst, which is Eliza, right? Like we talked about before. And Conway plays, and it's like, okay, tell me about how you're feeling. I feel lost. And I'm thinking about drinking again. I was like, Jesus Christ. We're well on to the downslope into the pit by this point.
Yeah, and I mean, the therapist is about as helpful as you would expect Eliza to be. kind of gets you to go through this meditation exercise, which doesn't really help out Conway at all.
Not in the slightest. Well, like a meditation exercise about like a dimly lit, infinitely long corridor that he has to sit on a bar stool in, and just like, yeah, it seemed nightmarish.
Yeah. And then the other game is like a kind of management or like a life sim game, and it just gives you like, it's like, oh, you're in college and you have like these various things to deal with, and I do like that when, at the end of the game, like your score is very like, it's not a numerical score for the most part. It's just like an adjective or something. So it's kind of wacky and quirky and fun. I like that game. That was nice.
It's a nice little detail in there. You know, it's like you can, you know, you're at a crossroads. You can either become a grad student or take up rock climbing. And it's like, okay, you know, those are fun little options.
Yeah, like or live in a tree. You know, it's like, oh, this is a good tree. Everything feels right in this tree, and it you know, it's. I went through all the different permutations that you can go through on that game just because it was a little bit of fun. And again, the computer has that really cool effect to the text that you get there. I think it's the same as in Act 1.
It's got that, I think all the computer interfaces in this have that, like, amber glow, which is really lovely.
No.
Oh, wait, is this one different?
Yeah, this one is white on black.
I don't think I recall that being... I don't recall noticing that was different between the other ones.
Yeah, it is. It's like a white on black monochrome CRT as opposed to an amber on black.
Ah, that'd be so cool. It'd be so cool if like they were all like, I mean, I don't know if there's many other like times to interact with the computer aside from the big one later, but if they were all subtly different because they're actually different models of computer, you know, there's different textures to represent the text. Yeah, that is quite fun.
Yeah, they definitely put some work into that.
Fantastic. Elsewhere in Kentucky, there's a lot of other optional content that you can go and look at. But one that jumped out to me was, I think it's a bus stop outside a clock shop or something. But Conway will kind of drift again. He'll just kind of like space out and remember his backstory with Lisette, which is quite interesting. That they knew each other in school and they would, you know, skip class and go drinking and that sort of thing. They would go around, hit the bars, and like, you know, Conway would help clean the bar while Lisette sings and that sort of stuff to earn money to drink. But they drifted apart eventually, I think when Conway took up working on the road. And then when he drifted back into town, he got a job roofing with this guy, Ira. And when Ira brought him home to meet the wife and kid, there's Lisette. And they kept quiet about it. They just kind of like nodded and were like, okay, yeah, we know each other. But it seems then that like Ira didn't actually know that they had a history. Which is an interesting little tidbit. Yeah, so this is a really important bit of backstory for Conway and for the scene that's coming up. But basically, this is another one of his regrets, right? That he had this kind of unrequited love for Lisette that was ruined because he took this job out on the road. And you know, he sort of says like, that's where I started drifting. Right, when I took that job, that's where I started drifting, and it's, you know, there's kind of an implication that if that hadn't happened, he might have had a better life, maybe. But you know, also they maybe,
yeah,
probably. I mean, things don't go well, so it's hard to imagine it being worse. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, so it's a big regret at the back of Conway's mind, and it's going to figure directly into the next scene. The other thing I will say about the Clockworks is you can pick up passengers and drive them places on the overworld. I picked up the young woman, and actually she has another sort of ADHD story where it's like she's trying to design a better office chair mechanism, and she's sort of like, you know, stuck in a dead-end job, talks about how, like, you know, the teachers were always worried she wouldn't live up to her potential because she couldn't focus in school. It's just sort of classic ADHD coding. and you know, just basically this little story about someone who's like, yeah, didn't really do so good in school, super bright, has this project they're focusing on, but basically they'll never amount to anything because their work is always going to hold them back. Little stories like that.
Yeah. I think I picked up. It wasn't that one. It was somebody else. I don't really recall what the story was, but it had an amusing thing where it, like, you're driving towards this person's house and like there's this you know, when you interact with it, you get this like, this person is telling you their backstory and then it just cuts off and it's like, oh, that's my house there, and he just jumps out of the car. It's quite a funny little thing. But it's like you're like getting really into it, his backstory. He's like, oh yeah, fine, whatever, bye bye, Greg. Anyway, I think maybe there's another tiny small detail. If you pull up to the Marquez farmhouse, you can't go in there. It's just a text description. Both the barn and the cave entrance are gone, and the horses are just like standing around, not bothered by anything. So how are you going to get back to the zero? If you thought you were going to skip this scene and get straight back to Lula, you're wrong. That's not going to happen. We pull up at this bar, the Lower Depths. We've heard of this one before.
It's mostly the same as in the entertainment in terms of its layout. The difference is there's a big stage on the right, which wasn't there in the entertainment. And obviously this is a like a more believable space. It's not just like staged. It's like it's got like normal flooring, and it has like lighting from above as opposed to just from the back of the bar. You know, there's like chairs and kind of a more normal configuration, although you can go up to the table where your character was sitting with the brick sandwich. It's still there. The goggles are still there. So yeah, it's pretty much you can see how the entertainment is like a different interpretation of the same space. Like the jukebox is there on the left instead of the machine that plays the audio cues for the play. It's pretty neat. It's pretty neat to see this like restaging or recreation of this space, kind of abstracted space.
The priming for this was really, really good. Like the way the interludes are done to like prime you for what's coming next in the main acts is really nice. And it does become evident that this is kind of immediately after the content of the entertainment, if not the form of it. Because Harry is there, and Junebug and Johnny are disappointed because nobody's here to see the show, and he's like, yeah, everybody had to clear out. Very ominous delivery on those lines.
Yeah, the other thing is like you can have another line of dialogue where he's like I struck a deal with I struck a deal. Like there's a lot of like really like shifty, suspicious dialogue from Harry, and like Harry is constantly mentioning how like he's not a good person, and how like basically like he has a lot of guilt about what he's done, sending everybody off to the distillery.
Absolutely. Rightfully so. There's an interesting bit then when Harry is doing the usual line. It's like, oh, so it's only hard times whiskey. And I think Conway's option is to say, oh yeah, sure, I'll have a whiskey. But Shannon cuts him off immediately and is like preventing him from drinking. She kind of knows what the score is. Which I don't recall seeing that happen in the dialogue before, where you select an option, but it's not the line that gets spoken next. That's Shannon's agency shifting as well, right? Like where even when you are ostensibly Conway selecting a dialogue option, it's actually Shannon who's in the driver's seat, and it's subtly moving your agency away off of Conway and onto Shannon, which is very nice. We then get this absolute fucking blowout performance with Johnny and Junebug on stage, performing a song "Too Late to Love You." This is fucking spectacular because like the scene is very low. It's set very low to the ground and there's a very low ceiling. But when they take to the stage, the lighting changes and their costumes instantly change. And then the roof peels away to reveal the night sky, and it's this is just incredible to look at.
This is amazing. It's one of the signature scenes for this game, and it reminds me a lot of the opera scene in Final Fantasy VI, in that there's like music and you're making choices to construct the song. But this is actually more dynamic, because essentially you have options on screen to choose a lyric, and then that is going to basically like set the next section of the song up, and the character will Junebug will sing it, and then you get to choose what's going to come next. Whereas in FF6 it was more of a memorization game where it's like you had to pick the right one. There is no wrong one here. It's just like choose your own song.
Choose your own adventure song, yeah. The outfits are wonderful. Junebug has this beautiful blue dress, and Johnny has this like red jumpsuit with his little keytar. And I love the animation on their dancing. Like they're just bopping, and well, Johnny's fairly static. He's just kind of bopping with his keytar, but Junebug does these really wonderful little gestures with her arms and shit. It's fantastic. Really, really beautifully animated.
Johnny's appearance here kind of reminds me of like Devo in some ways.
Yes, absolutely. He has the glasses and everything and the little buzz cut. Fantastic. The content of the song seems to be borrowed from Lisette, probably, because before they start, Junebug mentions that this is a song she heard in a tavern a while ago. It's a lonely, sad song. The lyrical content does really seem to be about Lisette pining after Conway, which then seems to be confirmed at the end when Conway, they're like, "How was that?" And it's like, "I heard it before," from Conway. And
it's like, "Oh, I've heard this before." Yeah,
It's that all of that is really kind of interesting, because the timelines could be a bit screwy there as well. Where when would he have heard this? Because would he have heard it while they were bombing around, skipping school, and he was washing dishes while she was singing or something? In which case, he wasn't gone yet for her to regret that, or did he hear it after he started working for Ira? Would they be hitting bars together then, or was Lisette hitting bars and stuff, or is Conway's memory a little bit scrambled from the Neuropnol? Maybe all of the above, you know?
I kind of took it a bit differently, where it's like, he knew that Lisette was a bar singer, and I think he's kind of just putting two and two together here, where it's like, oh yeah, I heard this in a bar around here, and then it's like, and he's like, oh yeah, I'm the person that this song is about. You know, it's like I like he hasn't literally heard it before, but he's like, oh yeah, okay, I know where this comes from, and it fucking sucks.
The content is immediately familiar in a sense. Yeah, okay, that definitely works. But yeah, like the scene is incredible, right? And like the roof tiles settle back into place, and there's actually quite a nice little sour note at the very end as the lights come back up, which is wonderful. However, Harry can't pay because he's clean out of money. All he has is a IOU from the distillery, to which Conway helpfully suggests, "Yeah, we can take that, sure, as payment. Why not?" But that's kind of a problem because they would have to go down there to collect on it. And Junebug and Johnny nod and they're like, "Yeah, we understand what that means. We'll take it."
Yeah, like Harry basically says, like, I've heard some rumors about that place. You sure you want to go down there? And then they're like, oh yeah, no, we'll do it.
Again, the subtle kind of like, something not quite right about those boys.
Yeah, yeah.
You'd be getting yourself in trouble if you went down there.
And this is how they get roped into this party, right? Like, because it's like, oh well, we need to go to the 02 to collect.
Yeah, I mean, they still. Yeah, that's their way of making that work for the moment. There's a very before we leave, there's a very interesting and weird line from Harry that I'm not totally sure what to make of, because when you're in these kind of dialogues, there's a couple of options for like making the connective tissue work here, and one of them is for Conway to say that, hey, we need to get on the 0 also because we're looking for Dogwood Drive, and then Harry says, oh, Dogwood, do you have like I've got a stack of letters, did you get them too or something? And he's like,
I think this is a reference to the mail delivery boat that is going to come up at the end of the chapter, because that boat, because Lula tells you to take that boat to Dogwood Drive once she figures out where it is.
On the mail boat. Okay, that makes sense. I didn't put that together, and I thought, like, why does Harry have a stack of letters maybe misdelivered that are destined for Dogwood Drive or something? But there's nothing else to elaborate on it. No, I think you're quite right in that interpretation. The directions that Harry gives you back to the 0 are very interesting. You turn on the radio, drive until you hear something familiar yet strange, and then turn around immediately when that cuts out. Which gives us this really, really cool little vignette, because like you tune into the radio, and the channel they settle on is this weird like noise thing of like the sounds of horses. And I think for Conway, it's like it's familiar because Ira loved horses or something. I think Shannon has a similar excuse.
Yeah, well, I guess there were horses on the property, right? On the Marquez property. Probably reminds her of Weaver. Yeah, I mean, this, it's all about regret. It's all about regret.
Yeah.
That's what this chapter's about.
Well, you got to tune into the radio channel all about regret, right? And then when it cuts out, the animation you get, or the little micro scene, is very, very cool, where the truck pulls up to a stop on the highway in the pitch dark, and all you can see is just horses standing around in the dark, illuminated by the headlamp, and then the truck just stops and turns around and pulls away. At which point you're dumped into the 0 at a location called The Horses. On this loop, there's only one other option, though. You can't go anywhere else aside from this other landmark called the Hall of the Mountain King. This is another one of these like tenuous kind of connective tissue bits, which, on reflection, like once we see some of the scene, it'll become apparent that there is an in-game explanation for why this is the case. Because when we pull up at the Hall of Mountain King, we get like the bridge that you're driving on is broken, and so you get like the truck is stopped at the edge of the broken bridge, and eventually you'll get to the other side, and it's like this is actually a derelict part of the 0 that doesn't actually connect to any other part because it's broken. And you have to traverse the Hall of the Mountain King to get to the other side to get back onto the main part. So it's not just a gameplay conceit that the only option you have is to go on to the... Like, if you had gone in through through the Marquez house entrance, you would have ended up in the main circuit of the Zero. But because you've gone this other weird way through the horse aperture, you will instead be dumped into this side channel of the Zero that has been cut off by a collapsed bridge. So it does work, but this is why it felt kind of Teflon-y for, like, you know, I can remember the two scenes. I remember the bar scene, and I remember the Hall of the Mountain King. But for the life of me, I really struggle to remember how they get between the two.
Yeah, the fact that it's the only option on the road is, you know, there's no strong plotting there. It's just like, oh, okay, well, this is where I go, I guess. Yeah. This
is where they need to be, you know. Very cool scene, though. Huge cave, and, like, you're kind of walking up this path to get to the center of it. I think Johnny stays with Blue at the truck while the rest of them go off. And you walk up this huge walkway, and it's like, again, like, just massive amount of stalactites and stalagmites all over the place. And you find this, like, huge, like, pile of burning computers in the middle of the fucking cave. And you're then in this kind of, like, circular boardwalk around the pile. Just a super fun little space to navigate.
Yeah, I just will say about Johnny, like, there's a line from Junebug about how, like, he's basically, like, the dog for her. Like, you know,
yeah.
like he's like her sidekick, basically. Like, literally rides in the sidecar on her motorbike, sticks around with Blue when you go to do things, is just calls her ma'am, is that right?
Yes, I believe so. Calls her ma'am. She calls him Cricket as a little pet name.
Yeah. So it's very, like, a kind of, like, you know, like, he's this affectionate sidekick character that she has.
He's a much more passive character, and he's more subtle. Like, he will come into his own, but, like, more slowly. Whereas Junebug is the much more active character. And she's a bit more loud and brash. So. Which makes her a really fun addition to these scenes. Yeah, she's quite fantastic. As you go up the boardwalk, the first person you encounter is Amy, and the way she greets you is quite fun. She's like, "Oh, it's triangles within triangles down here," you know, and it's like, she's like, she immediately reads a set of recursive love triangles into the people she's just met. She's like, "Oh yeah, Shannon, you're here to steal back the heart of the boy you once loved, but you're escorting her, pretending to have her best interest at heart." And then she's like, to Junebug, it's like, "But really, you're in love with the young woman," and so on and so forth. And, like, the dialogue options are really fun. It's like Shannon can either respond with, "What are you talking about?" or Junebug can be like, "Yeah, I'm into it." It's very fun.
Well, it's very much like like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail with her. Where it's like the only thing she knows how to do is make love triangles.
She's a writer, you know. She's been writing Mills and Boon novels. You know, she's an erotic writer who got into computers because, you know, everything's computers nowadays. So she went back to college to study human-computer interaction, and then got roped into Donald's project. There's a fun line. There's something very fun here where she's like. Because, like, we don't really know what this is about quite yet, but she's saying that, like, in her off hours, she used to play with the doomed love story at the core of the little simulation. But now it's just a pile of bugs and so on, right? And, like, she misses those days back in her studio apartment, right? Just doing the old writing erotic literature.
Yeah, like, this obviously hasn't worked out for her, so she's got her own regrets. I think the triangles within triangles thing is also sort of like a double entendre, because it's like love triangles, but then it's also polygons, right?
It's all, yeah, definitely right. It's all. That's the way it renders. But if we swing around to the left, then we run into somebody who's labelled as Old Man, but is Donald. The other, he's the third node in the Lula Joseph Donald triangle. This whole thing is this ode to crumbling academia and the sort of I don't know. There's like a lost futures angle here as well, because a lot of it leans on the early intersection between computing and the humanities, those threads that went nowhere. and that Donald is still very much mourning the loss of these things.
Yeah, that's right. It's essentially like he was leading a research team that was working on something that was so out there that they couldn't really get funding for it. He's working, essentially he was developing an interactive fiction project. It's
like a simulation or an AI system of sorts, but with like a lot of non-linear dynamics and stuff like that. And like there's
so this is this project Xanadu that he's been working on is a reference to a real world a piece of software, the first real interactive fiction game called the Colossal Cave Adventure, which is enormously influential, unlike Xanadu. But there are a number of points of contact or a similarity between Colossal Cave Adventure and Xanadu that we'll kind of get into. But it's kind of this fringe project in the world of computing. It's just the story of Donald is one that's more of a failure, and it does definitely get at that interactive fiction angle, which sort of figures into like the origins of game studies as a discipline, which a lot of it came out of hypertext and interactive fiction. But that was like not until like the late 90s that really started to become a discipline, thanks to the prevalence of video games that were not that. Right, like the video game industry took off as platformers and shooters and all this other kind of stuff, right? Real-time strategy games. And these people who had been fucking around with hypertext and interactive fiction kind of like hopped on that bandwagon and made the discipline of game studies. But they had kind of just been like weirdos in literature departments and stuff until that time.
Yeah. And now we're confronted with weirdos who haven't seen a literature department in quite a while and have been stuck in a cave for a couple of decades. There's something very sad about all this, right? Because the way Donald talks is still very much in the kind of academic mode. Because he's like, oh, maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you read about Xanadu in a journal. And he's like, he names a journal like Literary Multitudes, Hypertextual Narrative as Post-Structural Witness. And it's like, yeah, that's right on the money for like 90s... hypertext fucking computer. It's very like, I don't know, it's like that Warwick stuff, right? The CCRU kind of thing, right? Yeah, that post-Marxist kind of like when the wall came down and everyone was into computers stuff, in the humanities. Oh, I don't know, there's something eerily familiar and depressing about all this.
Yeah, it's very funny. Like whenever I'm like workshopping a paper title with my team in school, in grad school right now, it's always like I want to give it a straightforward title, and then everyone's like, no, that's no good. We need to add a subheading to it.
It needs to have. It has to have a sub somehow in it.
Yeah, it has to have a subtitle, or it's never gonna work. I'm just like, oh my fucking god. Okay, I don't know. It's just that academic bullshit. It's like, can't we just say the thing is the thing that it's talking about? Can't we just title it in a straightforward way? No, that's far too direct. You gotta hedge everything and make it obtuse, and yeah.
You gotta gild the lily, you know.
You gotta gild the lily, otherwise it's just not scholarly enough. Yeah,
absolutely. But that's Donald. That's all Donald here, right? And he's like, there's a fun intersection of because he's like, oh, because he's mourning all this sort of stuff. He's very despondent about it. And he's like, do you have any idea what it's like to spend your life building something and then sit powerlessly as your work declines into ruin? And then your options are like Conway saying like, yeah, I drive deliveries for a fucking antique shop, or Shannon being like, I fix TVs, or Ezra being like, my family disappeared. You know, and it's like, okay, yeah, maybe they do have some idea.
Yeah, that's not quite it, because it's Conway saying, I've spent my life driving for an antique shop that's about to close down, or Shannon saying, yeah, I fix TVs and like I've got too much debt to keep the place going, you know, or like Ezra saying, I lost my family. So it's all people are like, yeah, like actually I lost everything, so I know exactly what that's like, just not in this like romantic way that you know it, right?
I do love Junebog's option, which is just not really.
Yeah, not really. I'm on an upward trajectory here, y'all. It's like rip to your life projects, but I'm built different.
She's got real Zoomer energy, you know. She's just like it's such a fun injection of new character into the thing, you know. But yeah, like, so there's a lot of Xanadu was this like AI simulation system. Specifically it's been augmented with mold that they discovered there was like nonlinear dynamics that they could inject into it.
Yeah, it's very like Beer's swamp computer weirdo shit that's happening here.
Yeah, right. It also seems to have been that like injecting the kind of mold into it or allowing that to happen just increased the variety of the thing to the point where it was unmanageable and has decayed into ruin. He's also smoking the mold in his pipe, which is very amusing. Like, why bother with weed when you can have clean, crisp mold in your pipe? You know, it's fantastic. What does he prompt you to do then? I think it's like, what's the prompt here? He invites you to go look at it, right? To like see, you can look at the ruins, look at the ruins of the thing. But in order to get there, you have to traverse over to the other side of the cave. On the way, you can meet another couple of grad student people who got sucked into this vortex. There's Andrew, who has been tasked with mapping and describing the caves down here. There's something really sad here because he's like, you know, his story is that he got suckered into this, and he's like, yeah, I really have put in the hours, you know, don't get me wrong. And he's like, my dude, you've been in a cave for a couple of decades, like, you could just go, you know, like, but I don't know, does this resonate with like dead end academic stuff? Like, it seems to.
Oh yeah, oh big time. Or it's like you're stuck in a failed research program, and it's just like leaving is like inconceivable because your entire reality is just academia and this like cloistered reality. Yep, I've been there. I know what that's like.
Roberta then has a slightly more apocalyptic take on this, where she opens with the line, "The kingdom is in peril." And there's some fun lines here where, like, if Ezra quizzes her, like, what do you mean about the kingdom? And she's like, oh, this is a cool kingdom and there's treasure scattered everywhere. And like, the descriptions of the treasure are fantastic because one of them, I don't know why this grabs me, but it really does. It's a magic mirror that prevents the future. I don't know. That's super evocative and cool. But she's just doing this riff, you know, it's like, oh, the kingdom is in peril, like the kingdom of, like Donald's kingdom, the kingdom of academia. And maybe this is part, like, her outsider perspective comes from her being an independent scholar that got roped into this project. So she's not quite as bought into the whole thing as the others are.
She's an autodidact. She just really liked reading stuff as a kid, and so she became an autodidact and then got roped into this project after it was sort of fringe. Outside of academia.
Huge mistake, you know, knowing things, reading things, massive fucking mistake, you know. Knowing about stuff is a strange game, and the only winning move is to not play. That's my take on things.
Yes. Stop this podcast now. Don't learn anything.
Do not learn.
Return to monkey.
What's that fucking meme format these days where it's like, don't do mathematics anymore. It's been an absolute scam. Look at this shit. Look at these diagrams. It's nonsense. They have played us for fools, you know?
So this treasure stuff, I believe, is a reference to the Colossal Cave Adventure, because one of the things you do in that game is you move through the cave system and collect treasure. So this is a nod to the Colossal Cave Adventure.
Do you get a magic mirror that prevents the future? Because I really want that.
I don't know if that's one of the treasures, but like the treasure conceit is from that game.
Yeah, you're quite right. That has to be a direct reference, really. I love the notion of like this being, I don't know, like something that prevents the future being of great use to these people, because as doomed as their project is, moving on from it seems impossible. And so you would want to prevent the future from happening somehow.
Yeah.
There's something very evocative in that one line, which is very cool.
Well, I mean, it seems very appropriate for our society as a whole, too.
Yeah, well, I mean, don't we all want to prevent the future that seems to be happening, you know?
Yeah.
I'd give anything for that magic mirror.
Working in futures, I can see how this has a broader application.
Oh no, yeah. Jesus. Yeah, and then the next scene is Xanadu. Looking at the notes here, I had no fucking idea this was like such a close reference to something that exists in the world. So Kyle, what's this cave adventure, Colossal Cave Adventure all about?
Right, so as I mentioned, the Colossal Cave Adventure is the first known work of IF, or interactive fiction. And this is, I think, something they pulled on, first to, well, just because of its history and what they're doing in this game. But secondly, because very famously, this game, the Colossal Cave Adventure, was written by Will Crowther, who was, a sort of developer on early ARPANET internet stuff, and created this computer game, this interactive fiction game, for his daughters after he had divorced his wife, Patricia. And in the past, they had both been cavers, working to create these vector map surveys of the Mammoth Cave in Kentucky in the early 1970s for the Cave Research Foundation. So he had all this sort of life history tied up in these caves, and he made use of that history to create this cave adventure game that his daughters could play. So it was kind of a mashup of his actual knowledge of the cave system with his interest in D&D, because this was the early days of Dungeons and Dragons, the BX days of Dungeons and Dragons that you see in Stranger Things, right? This, so he's basically a combination of D&D and his knowledge of the caves, and it's pretty much the sort of game, well, it's very much the sort of game you see in Xanadu. The Xanadu game is just adapted. What Xanadu has is a actual graphical display, that is done on an oscilloscope. Whereas if you look at a picture of the Colossal Cave Adventure as it was programmed for the PDP-10 computer originally, it was simply text. So it's very much like the text display that you see at Equus Oils. That display may have been themed after the PDP-10.
Probably, yeah. Look at that thing. Holy shit. Amazing.
Yeah, so if you go to Wikipedia, look up Colossal Cave Adventure, you can see this image of the original game running on the original hardware.
Gosh, that's amazing. Very cool.
So yeah, I think the key thing here is that it's kind of like a game that was conceived out of a sense of regret over a failed marriage, and that gets to the love triangle that is in this game, but also the broader theme of regret that runs through this whole chapter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, even looking at the screenshot, or the photo, the Xanadu does actually borrow quite a few lines and settings from this Colossal Cave Adventure. And I guess the Colossal Cave Adventure being based on surveys of, inspired by their experience doing surveys of the Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. This underground section of the Zero, this cave section, is realistically probably the Mammoth Cave, or heavily inspired by it. So that's really amazing that's all there.
And there are a lot of connections, for example, the locations in Colossal Cave Adventure are named after sort of terms of art used by spelunkers, and this is basically the same in Xanadu. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of connections between these two games. It's very much like Xanadu is a riff on this original.
Mm-hmm. And I guess Colossal Cave Adventure is the original of Kentucky Route Zero, right? Kentucky Route Zero is very much in this style of interaction. It just happens to have fancy graphics bolted on as well, but the core interaction is the same. And you'll notice that the core interaction is the same in Xanadu as well. It's very much a nested game within the game that has basically the same interaction paradigm. It even has the title cards and such. But it's when the gang interact with Xanadu, it's kind of busted, right? It's gorgeous to look at because you get this centered view of this CRT oscilloscope vector kind of graphics thing, which has this beautiful amber glow to it, and that's all wonderful. And there's the ambient drone is fantastic, but the text is all scrambled. It's all over the fucking place, and they can't make head nor tails of what it's actually saying, except that it does seem to maybe sometimes say the words Lula and Joseph. So they're suspicious immediately as to what the fuck's going on. Shannon tries a degausser on the screen, but it doesn't really help. It's just a fun little button you can click to make the screen flicker, but it doesn't seem to do much for you.
Yeah, the amount of work that went into this display is pretty incredible because, as I mentioned, the original Colossal Cave Adventure was not displayed on an oscilloscope. But this is, I think, probably just because they thought it looked cool, which it does. But I think that the most impressive thing about this display is that the more detail that is on the screen, the slower the refresh rate of the screen runs.
Yeah, there you go.
Which is just like an oscilloscope, right? Because it has a certain horizontal speed that it can draw stuff onto the screen, and when you add more details, it basically takes longer for it to draw from one side of the screen to the other side of the screen, which is a really cool physical simulation that they've worked out on this screen here, which you don't see in any other display in the game.
Yeah, I think this is This is kind of emblematic of the thing that happens in Kentucky Route Zero, where there's something that it's just very impressive immediately, and it's just very satisfying to look at. And then upon reflection, it's hold on, they're probably physically modeling a CRT in the game engine to make this work or something. And it's wow, there's a lot of work going into that. And then you start to realize, oh yeah, of course this took 5 years to release in between episodes, because they had to work out how to physically model a CRT inside the fucking Unity engine or whatever,
Yeah, and it's not just any CRT. It's not like a Shadow Mask or, a Shadow Mask based CRT, which we're all used to using. It's it's an oscilloscope based one or a vector graphics one. Yeah, so it's very particular kind of CRT that is no one uses really anymore, except for if you're literally doing electrical engineering work and you need to work with an oscilloscope. Of course you could see that video of those people who got doomed to run on an oscilloscope, but no one's really doing that stuff these days.
Yeah, this is so much fucking fun to look at. I love it. But the when they use the degausser, it doesn't do very much to help. But the program moves on to a title card, which seems quite suspicious. The Hall of the Mountain Gink I was like, what? What the fuck? And it shows like a rendering of the spire, like the environment you've just been in. Also, it's so cute that because like the title card for Xanadu itself is kind of scrambled. Like it's Zikadanga Nagadu or whatever, and the text is scrambled on screen and all that kind of shit. But then Hall of the Mountain Gink, I think, is such a very cute little like way to make it fuck up. I don't know. There's just something very laughable about it. It's just very cute. But the program then crashes, unexpected end of file and so on. And they're like, well, shrug, this thing's fucked. So they pitch back to Donald and he's like, yeah, but like, you can see what it once was, can't you? You know, and he realized this story that like it started to crumble when the strangers came and they were horrible things. And he's like, oh, if only I'd listened to Lula. And they're like, oh, hold on, we know Lula. We're actually looking for her right now. And he's like, oh, she's long gone. But she still lives in Xanadu, over there. And so he misunderstands what they're saying. Like, I think they think that Lula still works here, rather than they saw her 3 hours ago. But there's an interesting hint there. It's like she's still in Xanadu somehow. And he says that like Xanadu was a flawless oracle and a perfect simulation. And then he's like, hold on, wait, maybe the strangers could fix it. Maybe that's how we get this thing back online. He points you towards a tunnel at the back that you don't actually traverse. This just switches scenes. But you can go ask the strangers about this. Well, that's it for this episode. Join us again next time when we will resume our discussion of the third act of Kentucky Route Zero. In the meantime, you can find us on the web at generalintellectunit.net. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, etc. And we're on all the podcast apps, so like, rate, and subscribe. If you go to patreon.com/generalintellectunit, you can throw us a couple of bucks a month to keep the glowing skeletons away from the door, and to get access to our community Discord. You should also check out Emancipation.Network and have a look at our sister shows such as From Alpha to Omega, Swampside Chats, Jumpsuit Utopia, and Mortal Science. They are excellent shows and excellent folks. As always, thanks for listening, and we hope you've enjoyed this show.